So, welcome to this session of International Business Organization. Uh, and we shall now discuss regarding the tariffs and non-tariff barriers that are being used by a country for uh, restrict the imports that are being done in a country. Now, before moving further regarding the tariffs and non-tariffs, uh, let us try to understand what do we mean by free trade. We tend to tell this a lot. So, it becomes easier to understand this protectionism policy when we know what is free trade. Now, as the name suggests, this free trade is a situation where the government does not stop its citizens either to buy goods or services from abroad, or it does not even restrict to sell goods and services in the foreign countries. But then, free trade is a rare phenomenon. Maybe theoretically it is present, but in actual practice, there can never be 100% of free trade. Now, government, although whatever it might tell, it usually and it actually tries to control uh, their they control what their citizens can buy or sell abroad through interventions in free trade. And these interventions they do through some of the instruments that are being used in the trade policies of the country. Now, the instruments that our government uses in intervening in trade policy, it can be broadly classified into two. That is tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers. Now, put simply, or in a very simple words, a tariff is nothing but a specific tax levied on import goods at the border. Now, this tariff has been historically a tool for government to collect revenue, but they are also a way to protect domestic industry and production. And the theory behind it is that when an increase in the price of imports, consumers would choose to buy the domestic goods instead buying from outside. But in today's global economy, many products we buy in the domestic country have definitely parts from other countries or which are being assembled in other countries or manufactured entirely overseas. Now, in today's free market learning global economy, tariffs have something of a bad reputation. And rightfully, there are many economists uh, which can be blamed for, for worsening. Uh, they, that is not to tell, this bad reputation of the tariffs has not come just like that. There are many reasons behind why tariffs today has been regarded as of bad reputation. Uh, for instance, what happened in UK during the Great Depression of 1930s was there was something called a smooth halfway tariff, which was imposed by the US government, and it was imposed with the intention to strengthen the US economy during the Great Depression, and the US government passed the smooth halfway tariff act. This increased the tariffs on the farm products and manufactured goods. Now, what happened was in response, other nations also suffering raised the tariffs on American goods, bringing global trade to a standstill. Now, since then, most policymakers on both the sides of the uh, regime, have turned away from trade barriers like tariffs towards free market policies, which would allow nations to specialize in certain industry and incentivize optimal efficiency. Now, speaking regarding this, the US had not imposed high tariffs on trade partners since the early 1930s or after the Great Depression. Now, the main reason because the tariffs during that era and the economists have estimated that overall world trade had declined about 66% between 1929 and 1934, and in the post World War second period, and that was the main reason they did not go for a severe kind of trade taxes. Now, the next question is how a tariff works. Now, tariffs are used to restrict import by increasing the price of goods and services purchased from other countries. And when the tax are increased, definitely the price of the goods would increase. And when people compare the domestic product with that of the goods being imported, it the imported goods would be less attractive to the domestic consumer as the price would go up. Okay. Now, speaking regarding this tariff, to tell in simple words, there are two kinds of tariff, a specific tariff and an ad valorem tariff. Now, what happens in a specific tariff is it is a tax levied as a fixed fee. Now, it does not take the value of the goods, but instead it would be a fixed fee. Maybe for a car, it might be $100, or for any goods that is being manufactured, for one item, it might be $1,000. So, irrespective of whether the car is worth of $10,000 or $20,000, the tax has to be paid of the amount that is being specified. The next one is ad valorem tariff. Now, under ad valorem tariff, what happens is that it is based on the value of the item. Might be a certain percentage. To tell 10% of the vehicle value of the vehicle. So, if at all now under ad valorem tariff, what happens is that if the car is worth 1000 rupees, then the tax would $1,000, the tax would be $100. If the car is worth $10,000, then the tax would be $1,000. Now, the government may impose tariffs to raise revenue or to protect the domestic industries. Now, definitely to protect the industry against the foreign competition. Uh, and the idea behind is, as we discussed earlier, the foreign produced goods are more expensive. Tariffs can make domestically produced alternatives seem more attractive. Now, the government that uses tariffs to benefit particular industry often do so to protect companies and also jobs. Now, these tariffs can also be used as an extension of the foreign policy of the country. Now, imposing tariffs on a trading partner's main export is a way to exert economic leverage. Now, the tariffs can have an unintended side effects also. However, they can make domestic industries sometimes less efficient and less innovative by reducing the competition. Then there are also chances that they can hurt domestic consumer since there is a lack of competition. It tends to increase the price. Now there are also chances that they can generate some kind of tensions in some kind of industries by favoring only certain industries or geographical areas over the other. Now that is to tell, if at all the tariffs would be designed such that it is designed to help manufacturers in the cities, it may hurt consumers in the rural areas who do not benefit from the policy. They will likely have to pay more manufactured goods. Now, having said all this, an attempt to pressure a rival country by using tariffs can devolve into an unproductive cycle of retaliation, which we commonly refer to as trade barriers. That is the act of increasing the tariff from one country and a retaliation act taken by the other. That might lead to what is being called as trade war. Now, what are the basic of tariffs and trade barriers? Now, international trade increases the number of goods that domestic consumers can choose from, and it will also decrease the cost of the goods through increased competition, and also allows domestic industries to ship their goods or sell their goods abroad. While all of this effect seems beneficial, free trade isn't widely accepted as completely beneficial to all the parties who are concerned in this. Now, the next question is, who collects a tariff? Now, in very simple words, a tariff is nothing but a tax. Now, it adds to the cost borne by consumers of imported goods and is one of the several trade policies that a country can enact. Now, tariffs are paid to the customs authority of the country which imposes the tariff. Now, continuing, it is important to recognize that the tax owed on imports are paid by domestic customers and not imposed directly on the foreign country's exports. Now, the effect is nonetheless to make the foreign products relatively more expensive for consumers. But in other cases, if the manufacturers rely on imported components or other inputs in their production process, they will also pass the increased cost on to the consumers. Now, often goods from abroad are cheaper because they offer cheaper capital or labor costs. Now, if those goods become more expensive, then consumer will choose the relatively costlier domestic product. Now, overall, consumers to lose out with tariffs where the taxes are collected domestically. Now, a question might arise to tell what is this trade war? Now, a trade war happens when one country, it retaliates or takes measures against another by raising import tariffs or placing such other restrictions on its imports. Now, usually this trade war begins or commences when one of the countries perceives that a competitor nation has unfair trade practices. Now, domestic trade unions or industry lobbies can place pressure on politicians to make the imported goods less attractive to consumers and thereby pushing international policy towards a trade war. Now, usually these trade wars are, a result of a misunderstanding of the widespread benefits of free trade. Now, the next question is, why are the tariffs and trade barriers are being used by a country? Now, these tariffs are often created to protect infant industries and developing economies, but are also used by more advanced economies with developed industries. Now, there can be many reasons why these tariffs and trade barriers are used. Some of the reasons could be, first one is protecting domestic employment. Now, this, putting the tax or the tariffs, what we call, it is usually would be highly politicized without any doubt. The possibility of increased competition from import goods usually threaten the domestic industry. Now, the domestic companies may fire workers or shift production abroad directly to cut costs. Now, which means higher employment and a less happy electorate. Now, the unemployment argument often shifts to domestic industries, which complain regarding cheap foreign labor and how poor working conditions are there present in the domestic country, and also lack of regulations usually allow foreign competitors to produce goods more cheaply. Now, in economics, however, countries will continue to produce goods until they no longer have a comparative advantage. Now, the next reason could be protecting consumers. Now, a government may usually go in for these tariffs on products if at all it feels that this importing could, endanger or have some negative effect on its public or on its population. Okay. Now, to give an example, maybe the South Korea might go in for placing a tariff on the imported beef from the United Nations. If at all it feels that the beef that are being imported is containing some kind of disease in it or any other such measures. Now, the next argument is regarding infant industries. Now, the use of tariffs to protect infant industries can be seen by the import substitution industry, or what we call as ISI strategy employed by many developing nations. Now, the government of a developing economy will levy tariffs on imported goods in industry in which it wants to foster growth. Now, this increases the price of the imported goods and creates a domestic market for domestically produced goods while protecting infant industries, from being forced out by more competitive pricing that importers, that the manufacturers of the other countries would bring. Now, it also decreases unemployment by allowing people to work in their country on a larger scale, and also allows developing countries to shift from agricultural products to finished goods. Now, criticisms of protectionist strategy usually revolve around the cost of subsidizing the development of infant industries. If an industry develops without competition, it could wind up producing lower quality goods, and the subsidies required to keep the state backed industry afloat in what we call as economic growth. The next reason is national security. Now, barriers are also employed by developed countries to protect certain industries that are deemed strategically important. Now, such as those supporting, national security, defense industries are often viewed as vital to state interest and often enjoy significant level of protection. For example, both Western Europe and the United States are industrialized. Both are very protective of defense oriented companies. Now, the next reason could be retaliation. Now, countries may also, put up tariffs as a retaliation measure. Now, if at all they think that trading partner has not played by the rules. For example, if France believes that the United States has allowed its, wine products to call its domestically produced sparkling wine campaign, or a name that has been specific to the campaign region of France, for too long, it may levy a tariff on imported meat from the United States. Now, if the US agrees to crack down on improper labeling, France is likely to stop its retaliation. Now, retaliation can also be employed if a trading partner goes against the government's foreign policy objectives. Now, the next topic is trade barriers. Now, speaking regarding this tariff barriers, this tariff barriers refers nothing but the tax. Now, these tariffs collected by the exporting country are called as export tariffs if they are collected by a country through which the goods have passed. Now, they are trans tariffs. Now, those collected by the importing countries are called import tariffs. Now, since import tariffs are common of all, Now, tariff barriers usually increase the price of imported goods in comparison to domestic goods, which make the imported goods costlier, giving the domestic goods a relative advantage over foreign goods, and thus they help the domestic government in reducing imports. When we speak in case of our country, the cheap imports of refined oil have hit the domestic vegetable oil producing industry hardly, with capacity utilization of this sector dropping to 30 to 40%. Now, to protect the domestic produce, the Indian government levies an import duty of 10% on refined edible oil to protect the domestic processing industry and farmers. Now, there is a question like, who benefits from tariffs? Now, speaking about the tariffs, the benefits of tariffs are uneven because a tariff is a tax. Now, the government will see increased revenue as imports enter the domestic market. Now, domestic market also benefit from a reduction in competition since import prices are artificially inflated. Unfortunately for consumers, both individual consumers and businesses, higher import price means higher price of goods. Now, the price of the steel is inflated or increased due to higher tariffs. Now, individual consumers may pay for product using the steel and business pay more for steel that they use to make goods. In short, tariffs and trade barriers tend to be pro-producers and also anti-consumer. Now, this effect of tariffs and trade barriers on business, consumers and the government shift over time. In short run, higher prices for goods can reduce consumption by individual consumers and also by business. Now, during this period, some business will profit and the government will see an increase in revenue from duties. Now, in the long term, these business may see a decline in efficiency due to lack of competition. And many also see a reduction in profits due to emergence of substitutes for their products. Now, when it comes for a government point of view, in the long term effect of these subsidies is nothing but an increase in the demand for public services. Since increased price, especially in foodstuff, leave less disposable income. Now, there might be one more question asked to tell, how do tariffs affect prices? Now, that is the question. Yes, we tell that we put taxes, the price of the goods of the imported price of the goods which are being imported also increases, thereby it reduces the imports and increases the domestic consumption. But the question is, does that actually happens? Now, tariff definitely increases the price of goods imported. But in actual what happens is, because of this, the domestic producers will never be forced to reduce their price from the increased competition, and the domestic consumers are left paying higher prices as a result. Now, tariffs also reduces the efficiency by allowing companies that would not exist in more competitive market to remain open. Now, if at all, if we see this particular figure, now if at all, if we observe this particular, you know, figure, it it gives an idea of the effects of the world trade usually when there is no tariffs at all. Now, in this particular figure, this particular DS, it means domestic supply, and the DD means the domestic demand. Now, the price of the goods at the home is definitely P. This particular variable P represents, the price of the goods which is found at the domestic country or home, while the P star represent the price of the goods in an global market or world price. Now, the price is more in domestic country because there is no economies of scale. But with the economies of the scale, the world price of the goods tends to increase. Now, when this is the case, at lower price, domestic consumer will consume QW, worth of goods. That is to tell, now when there is lower price, the people of the country would be using QW amount of goods. But the thing that we have to know is that the home country's part in this entire quantity of the goods that is being used in the country would be only QD, and the difference that is present between QD and QW is usually offset by the importing of the goods from other countries. Now, when a tariff or other price increasing policy is put in place, the effect is to increase prices and limit the volume of imports. Now, if we see one more diagram, here what happens is that the price increases from the non-tariff P star to that of P1, because the price has increased and more domestic companies are willing to produce the goods. So that's where if we compare QD of the first diagram to that of the QD of the second diagram, here there has been increase in measurement. That is to tell it has moved from the place. Now the overall effect is a reduction in import, increased domestic product and higher consumer price. Now moving forward, what might be the bottom line of all this? Now free trade benefits consumers through increased choice and also reduced price. But because the global economy brings with it uncertainty, many governments impose tariffs and other trade barriers to protect the industry. Now, there is a delicate balance between what we call as the pursuit of efficiencies and the government's need to ensure low unemployment. Now, the next topic is tariffs and modern trade. Now, how does this tariff has its effects on the modern trade? Now, the role the tariffs play in international trade has declined during the recent decade or two. Now, one of the very main reason for this declination is what we had discussed in our earlier class, that is the introduction of the international organization which with the main aim has been designed to improve free trade, such as it might be World Trade Organization or WTO. Now such organization make it more difficult for a countries to put tariffs and taxes on imported goods and can reduce the likelihood of the retaliatory tax. Now, because of this, countries have shifted to non-tariff barriers, such as maybe quotas and export restraints. Now, organizations or the international organizations like WTO attempt to reduce the production and consumption distortion which are created by tariffs. Now, these distortions are the result of domestic producers making goods due to inflated price and consumers purchasing fewer goods because price have increased. Now, since 1930s, many developed countries have reduced tariffs and trade barriers, which have improved global integration and brought about globalization. Multinational agreements between government increases the likelihood of tariffs reduction, while enforcement of binding agreements reduces uncertainty. Now, there is a bottom line for this type of tariffs. Now, free trade benefits consumers through increased choice and reduced price. But because the global economy brings with it uncertainty, many government imposes tariffs and other trade barriers to protect the industry. Now, there is a delicate balance between the pursuit of efficiency and government needs to ensure low unemployment. Now, now for this particular class, we shall wind up here, and in our coming session we shall continue further. Now, as I see the